Ewens. I'm the global managing editor at VIXIO Regulatory Intelligence. I look after a team of journalists covering the global gambling industry, specifically regulation, politics, that sort of thing. And I'm very lucky to have two extremely knowledgeable panelists with me today. Hey, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Actually, let's do that.
Hi, I'm Luka Popović. I'm a lawyer, partner in BDK, Advokati law firm, regional law firm from Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm the head of the firm's operations in Montenegro, and I'm also head of the firm's gambling practice.
Good day, everybody. Nice to see you all, and thank you for the invitation. So my name is Petar, Pešić, also a lawyer, coming from Serbia, specializing mostly in IT, iGaming, and corporate law matters.
Excellent stuff. Okay, you're sitting closest to me. Okay, so let's start in Montenegro. So I think when we did this panel last year, there was talk of some new legislation changes that might be afoot. Have those changes been realised? Are we in a brand new, exciting era of gambling?
Well, unfortunately, not quite. We still have this old legislation, which is quite outdated. It has been outdated a few years ago. I think it's 4 years ago, the first time I mentioned that the new legislation should be introduced soon. It still hasn't happened. There are different factors. But right now, the legislation that is governing the gambling industry in Montenegro is such that a lot of important things remain unregulated. For example, problem gambling, responsible gambling. For responsible gambling, it might be a surprise, but there is no regulation at all. So there are no obligations for the operators. Everything they do in that area is their own initiative, either individual operators or the associations of the operators. For example, the minors who are protected from accessing physical gambling establishments and facilities, and they should also not be permitted to play online. It's very easy for them to create an online account. If they can get hold of an ID of the parent, they can easily do it in a couple of minutes. And there is no restriction for them to play, because although they normally cannot buy and participate in games, it's quite easy for them to buy top-up vouchers, credits, which are being sold everywhere, on every newsstand, every shop, and even close to schools. Otherwise,
are people aware of that generally? That seems like the sort of thing that would create controversy.
They are becoming aware because it's a new thing. So the operators in the last 12 months, I would say, more and more operators are starting to cooperate with these newsstand companies and to sell the vouchers through them. There is no regulation, so they can do it freely, without a license, without any kind of permit. As anything else they sell, these newspapers. And they are also becoming creative, the operators, because now they understand there are no limits. You have, for example, they can offer you to bring you to the door. So you just order the voucher, they bring you now. So it's strange a bit that it's permitted. Otherwise, a gambling establishment, a gambling shop cannot be closer than 250 meters from school. And these shops are sometimes even within the schoolyard in some cases. So it's completely not regulated. So that's one of the fields that really needs urgent regulation.
Is the online space regulated at all at the moment?
Well, it is regulated in terms that it is permitted, so you can do it. Other than that, it's under-regulated. Very few provisions, very few restrictions. Even the tax, the gambling tax, is a fixed tax, a monthly payment, which does not depend on the revenue. So it's a fixed amount. And there are no any kind of technical requirements. It's pretty much unregulated.
Okay, well, we'll come back to talk a bit more about potential change in the moment. Let's turn to Serbia for a minute. Could you give us a kind of a flavour of what the situation is in Serbia at the moment, legislation-wise? Are we the same as Montenegro, or is it more cohesively regulated?
Well, it is pretty much similar in most aspects. Of course, online gambling, speaking of online gambling, it is permitted, it is licensable. There are, I think, 22 or 23 licensed operators. So on a B2C level, there are licenses, there are certain, let's say, general obligations about AML, RG, etc., but it's not overly regulated. It's actually, I share the sentiment with Luka, is that it's under-regulated in most areas compared to European jurisdictions, even neighboring countries, some of that. So in that sense, there is a lot of room to grow with the regulations, but at the same time, economically, business-wise speaking, it has allowed a lot of operators to actually grow locally, but also attracted international operators. So you would have names, just throwing it out, you know, Admiral, Bat, Merker, even recently I think Betson has entered the market. So it really allowed other companies to see Serbia as a sort of a perspective market in economic sense. But in terms of regulation, of course, one thing is that you regulate something, the completely different ballpark is to actually enforce those rules or try to understand how those rules are being enforced. So in that sense, enforcement powers, although they exist within the regulator, they're not being used very heavily. I mean, it's of course good for the operators that they don't have, you know, heavy fines or reprimands, but at the same time, you know, players are left for themselves. So in that sense, you can see that there is a narrative within certain, let's say, political parties, maybe on the opposition front, that they want to make more of an effort, especially in the land base, because you can actually see that kind of gambling, to actually move them a little bit away. As Luka mentioned, 200 meters from school is in Montenegro. In Serbia, it's 100 meters from school. And then 101 meter away from a school, you will have 7 or 8 betting shops in a row. So it really doesn't make sense from that perspective. But you know, if the operators are not working themselves to actually try to get in line or not to you know, poke the bear, then you are risking a possible further regulations. But to be honest, there is nothing on the horizon that would indicate that we should expect some more restrictions or a different kind of regulations for even land-based and let alone online gambling for that matter.
Does Serbia have an independent gambling regulator, or is it?
Yeah, it is. It's within the Ministry of Finance, but it's sort of an independent agency within it. Yeah.
But they're relatively, I don't know, is inactive too strong a word? I mean, what's your kind of characterization of the way they treat the market?
I mean, if you want to obtain a license, of course you can do so, and it's not that big of an issue. Let's say there are certain conditions attached to it, but in terms of enforcing some regulations, especially in advertising, let's say RG area, I haven't seen, to be honest, some action taken from there, even like a guidance on some matters. So it's very frequently seen, both what I mentioned land-based, but also in advertising, that you would have ads which even today, like in most of other markets around Europe, you wouldn't be able to see them because they are kind of pushing the limit too far. So they're not very active in that front, and I think they should, because at some point, you know, the ball's going to break, and then we are risking to go into the direction that it's going to hamper the business.
Is it the same in Montenegro with advertising, where there are basically very few limits?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, there is no, Montenegro does not have, Montenegro does not have dedicated law on advertising, and neither the gambling law has any particular provisions related to advertising. There is just one, actually, that you cannot advertise lottery tickets issued abroad.
It's weirdly specific.
Yeah, lottery or other gambling tickets, mine extract tickets. So it tells you how the legislation is. And also, I would say that The regulator, which is also not an independent agency, just a department in the Ministry of Finance, they're not active at all. So we have not seen that they're doing anything proactively, that they're involved in public discussion regarding the future of the gambling industry or legislation. The only case of enforcement related to gambling that I have seen is from the criminal courts when you step into the area of criminal activity. Now, and these are some really obvious situations of breaching the law, because providing games of chance or gambling without a license is a criminal offense. So only if that's quite obvious, if you set up a shop with slot machines without a license, yes, most probably they will enforce the law, criminal law in that case. But other than that, I really haven't seen anything in terms of enforcement, or, as a matter of fact, any other activity from the regulator.
I think, staying on the topic of advertising for a minute, we've seen in a lot of markets globally, it doesn't seem to be a regional issue, that advertising, and the volume in particular of gambling advertising, is something that does aggravate the general public and is often kind of catalyst for political change. I mean, what is your sense of the public view of advertising in Montenegro at the moment for gambling? Is that it? Or is the industry restrained enough? Is it different culturally? And I'm curious how it plays into that.
Culturally, gambling, especially sports betting, is quite well received in Montenegro. A lot of people play. I think that we have almost 900 shops, and population of Montenegro is 600,000 people, with foreigners maybe 700,000, so it's a small population. I think per capita that's huge number. So no, there's no such effect. The general public is not aggravated by advertising gambling. But still, you know, a completely unregulated area, gambling advertising is something that should be tackled. It can be an issue, especially concerning the minors and possible effects it can have on them.
And how about Serbia? Is there any concern around advertising gambling?
Well, as I said, I think it's more coming down to some kind of Twitter post or something like that. So it's not like a major outcry. At the same time, even when you hear some of those voices being taken out public by maybe some a notable public person that doesn't have a signed deal with an operator, because most of them do actually have like actors or singers, then they are not taking into account how much of revenue or how much of money operators are bringing to the advertising industry in general, because most of the advertising these days is run by banks, gambling operators, or pharmaceutical industry in Serbia. So different types of industries not very much present, especially in TV, radio. It's very expensive for them, so they go online, and these TV ads are usually maintained by, let's say, these three industries in general. So in that sense, if you would take out gambling advertising or introduce a watershed ban in Serbia, I think it's going to be a tough battle for a lot of TVs or radios to actually survive, because without that money, you know, even bigger TV stations, I'm not sure how they would actually be able to cope.
It sounds like that's not on the agenda of government, but is it something that's raised by, say, opposition politicians? It's in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's very slow talk, and really very, you know, you can only find it in certain areas and in certain times during the year, because obviously in Serbia there are, let's say, much bigger fish to fry than this. So in that sense, it's not really a matter of focus, even not just for the government, but also for the opposition politicians. And maybe I think there is a left-wing party that sort of wants to curb advertising, but that I don't think has any traction within even the voters.
Okay. There's a nice link up with the previous panel in the fintech space, and particularly we were talking about banking at the end. I'm aware from our conversations that banking is becoming quite a serious issue for gambling companies in Serbia. Could you explain a bit more what what the issues are.
Yeah, I mean, hearing this previous panel and hearing that these problems exist in other jurisdictions or have existed in the past, really, it sort of brightens me up a little bit, because obviously with the level of regulation and enforcement in Serbia, we didn't expect to have less problems than we have. The thing is that of all the banks that operate in Serbia, there are, I think, half a dozen or even more than that. Maybe just a few of them actually want to work with the gambling industry to open a bank account, even like for licensed gambling operators. The weird thing is, when you want to open a bank account as an operator that is applying for a license, you can't actually obtain a license until you have a bank account, and you can't open a bank account without a license. So in that sense, you're sort of stuck in the middle. But at the same time, what it comes down to is that you have, let's say, direct communication with the bank, explaining the situation, then having like a provisional bank account, something of the sort, before you can actually obtain the license. So it is a big issue, but I don't think the national bank is actually pressuring the commercial banks to allow operators to open bank accounts. So it really boils down to the company decision of a bank, whether they want to or not. And to my knowledge, most, if not all, of the operators are focused or have their accounts with a couple of banks. So, I mean, I guess the banks don't want to take too much of a risk in that sense, but at the same time, they're not, searching for cash flow that much. So we'll see how it goes in the future. But most of the time, not just in this, in other places, the banks in Serbia are a little bit too conservative. In a sense, they're not enthusiastic about new business, and they're sticking to traditional industries.
Luka, do you see the same issue in Montenegro or generally in the region? You were of similar banking issues?
Yeah, I would say it's quite similar in Montenegro. So banks are not quite hungry for new deposits generally, so they do not accept these clients, gambling clients. Most of them do not accept them at all. Few of them do, and even those that do accept, they have limitations, especially in terms of online payments and processing. They do not accept all cards, only issued in Montenegro, foreign cards, only a few of them, and things like that. So it is an issue, and plus if you mention, and this is not just related to gambling industry, any company that mentions cryptocurrency during the process of opening the account and the client due diligence process, the account will not be opened. So it's a no, you don't mention cryptocurrencies to banks in Montenegro, although cryptocurrency in Montenegro is not regulated, meaning it's permitted, although you can hear opposing positions. For example, recently we had a Ministry of Finance who said cryptocurrency in Montenegro is not regulated, meaning it is not permitted, which is not correct, and it's not what our constitution says. And we have, in a few days, the governor of the central bank who said cryptocurrencies are not regulated, so yes, they are permitted. So in that scenario, in that environment, banks are simply reluctant to accept anything related to crypto, plus very, very restrictive in terms of gambling clients.
Something that came up again as we were discussing things, Petar, which pricked my ears up, and I think will be interesting to anyone who's aware of the gambling scene in general. We heard about it yesterday in Austria around issues with gamblers being able to reclaim their player losses. This was a surprise to me, but that is also becoming an issue in Serbia, or at least there's potential.
It could.
Yeah, expand on that a bit more. It's very
I mean, obviously in Austria and Germany and other countries, it's more because there wasn't any licensing regime beforehand, and then you don't have certain obligations attached to it. But speaking about under-regulated RG area, there is not that much of a duty of care for players on the operators. So it's very frequent to see players losing a lot of money. In Serbia, even €1,000 for let's say 40% of families is a lot of money. So in that sense, if a player loses 5 or 10K, it really makes a whole lot of difference. And we have, let's say, within the lawyer industry, there is a very litigious, let's say, environment. So people are trying to find the next big thing in the sense of like a massive claim. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see sometime in the future, because of missing, let's say, that obligation. Because our law of games of chance does have, let's say, a general obligation to protect the players or to protect the minors or something like that. But it's not very specified how you should actually do that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see, based on the case law in European jurisdictions, something of the sort being copied, especially for the duty of care part.
And you think the law in Serbia is structured in similar enough a way to jurisdictions like Austria, where you could see the parallels if you were a clever lawyer?
Well, I mean, our legal system is based on, let's say, more of a German or Austrian traditional regime, but in terms of gambling law, not that much. I think, especially with Austrian regulations being like they are, German, on the other hand, in a different way. In Serbia, at the sense, it does have more clarity for the operators what you can do, but of course it's missing out on many areas such as care for players or RG, and in that sense, it does need to bring further regulations, and a little bit of enforcement wouldn't hurt, so that operators would be aware that economic situation obviously is not that good in Serbia. I would guess in all of the Balkan countries, for that matter. So losing a lot of money playing basically every day, even land-based and online, because our betting shops are not like usual betting shops in other parts of Europe. You can actually go there, have a cup of coffee, eat something, watch sports all day. Then you would play something in land-based operations, and then you will also play on your phone simultaneously. So then you are, effectively losing or playing a lot, not losing, but in a sense, it does incentivize you to spend more, hoping for a big win. And the advertising is directed, especially in that manner, to actually, you should play more because the big win is coming. And obviously from other jurisdictions, that's something that's very much looked down upon by the regulators. So in that sense, it would be good to see something bringing about this, because it is effectively, maybe incentivizing somebody to just try it out. Send one claim against one operator and see how it goes. There are some, as I said, some general obligations. They're not very much specified, but then if you take it to like a specific case and see if they actually contacted the player, try to get them to use timeout or self-exclude, although those things are operational basis, so it's not like you have an obligation to have them in place. But if such contacts haven't been made, or rather if you just contact the player to offer them more bonuses or something like that, you never know how it's going to pan out in court of law.
I guess that's an example of where, while it might be nice if you're an operator in that environment with very few restrictions on what you can do, in the long run, a little bit of regulation might help out. Yeah. We should spend a moment talking about Albania, just because that is probably one of the most significant developments in the Balkan region at the moment. A ban on gambling was introduced there in 2018, and the government is currently trying to reverse that ban, particularly as regards sports betting. And Luka, have you had a chance to look into this a little bit?
Well, yeah, they banned it in 2018. The ratio and the reason why they did it was, if I remember correctly, because problem gambling was quite an issue in Albania, and the perception that was the perception at least of the governing party, which is still in power, and they wanted to tackle black market. I don't know how, but they want to do it with the ban. The plan did not work out. obviously. Black market in Albania is huge.
Shocking to discover.
Yeah, it's surprising. The black market is huge. Some of the businesses relocated their operations to Montenegro, and of course everyone's playing on offshore online websites. So it didn't work, and now they're thinking, they did permit some very limited, a few licenses for casinos in 5-star resorts. Now they are thinking to permit gambling again. I don't know the details. I saw a draft law that was published some 5-6 months ago. The license fees and financial obligations generally would be much higher than they were before. If I remember correctly, at least some 2 million euros would be the bank guarantees minimum, and the only type of entity that would be permitted to get a license would be a joint stock company incorporated in Albania. So it will be much stringent than it was before for the ban.
I look back on our reporting, so I've stolen these facts from my colleague, but I think it was a 15%, it was sort of weird levy rather than tax. It went directly to sports and culture and innovation, but that's 15% of revenue. So pretty low by international standards, and there's will be a watershed ban on advertising until 10 p.m. probably. So, but still extremely significant in that you're moving from a ban to
Yeah, and it's interesting. In Montenegro right now, it's a bit complicated political situation because no party has a significant majority. We had elections in June, and they have to negotiate to form a government. A lot of entities, parties are involved, so even the minor parties now have this negotiation power, and they're now trying to push something from their political agenda. One of these minor parties wanted to ban gambling completely, and they're insisting on this during these negotiations. I think it makes no sense. Of course, this is a significant industry in Montenegro. I think 2% of employees in Montenegro work directly in the gambling industry, plus 7 or 8% of employees are indirectly engaged. So I don't think that this would pass, but still it's interesting to hear that there are voices like that.
We all had too many cocktails, so I won't hold it against anyone if there are no questions. But are there any questions? If not, I'll come up with some more. No, that's fine. We're recovering. I think, yeah, so we're talking about politics. There's an election next year in Montenegro, is that right?
We had elections every year.
Oh.
That's what I think. We shouldn't have, but in practice, that's what's happening. So this would be the third government in the past 3 years, and so no, I don't think that we will have new elections this year. But still, the deadline for this constellation of political parties that are negotiating, the deadline to form the government is very near, until the end of the month. So I hope that we will have the new government soon.
Talking of gambling bans, I guess, is there any, we talked about the opposition parties are proposing advertising bans. Is there any groundswell for a ban in general, particularly looking at neighbouring places like Albania?
No, I wouldn't expect anything of the sort. There wasn't any even suggestions or talks about it, but I wouldn't expect that to happen. As I said, as is the same in Montenegro, in Serbia, economy has, gambling industry has a big effect on economy. There is, I think, an approximate roughly 100,000 people are working in the gambling industry and associated industries with gambling. So that's a lot of working force. Introducing some kind of ban would mean what you're going to do with those people, where they're going to work. So in a sense, it's not feasible for, I think, even for opposition parties to actually suggest something of the sort. So I think it more revolves around maybe introducing a bit more stringent regulations on advertising, maybe RG, more or less. So I think that is the most that we can expect moving forward. But even that, as I said, it's only minor voices within minor opposition parties. And just to expand on the elections idea, I mean, we expect elections to happen either by the end of this year or maybe beginning of next. They are extraordinary elections, but as is the case in Montenegro, we have, although we have like a very strong governing party, we do have elections every couple of years. Don't ask me why, it's not my thing to answer. But regardless of that, gambling is not very much on the agenda for elections.
It's not going to be an issue, you think, that people will campaign?
No, I mean, maybe they would be, trying to introduce as part of some measures the opposition parties, but I wouldn't expect it to be very much on the top or even like in the mid section, because we have foreign affairs problems, we have obviously some internal affairs problems, and there are a lot of issues that seem more pressing for the existence of the state or the country rather than the gambling industry.
With that in mind, and to close, you said that Betson recently joined the market, so it seems like it's a fairly stable regulatory environment. I mean, what's your sense of the kind of growth potential of the Serbian market, particularly online?
Yeah, it does seem, I'm not an expert on economy and finance, but it does seem that there is a great potential. Although I think the market is slowly becoming saturated. There is, so there's an update that Flutter is also entering the Serbian market. So
I didn't know that. That wasn't that.
That's a new for me. I guess it's recent news. But I heard that there were negotiations, so it's finally resolved. If companies like Betson or Flutter enter in Serbian market, it does seem that there is a viable opportunity from an economic perspective to be there. As I said, regulations are more or less stable. Nothing major has happened in the past, let's say 5 to 6 years. Maybe some local regulations were introduced sort of on a technical level to maybe better understand how to do technical integrations and stuff like that, and clarify certain points. But it does seem that maybe operators with their questions towards the regulator are maybe forcing the hand of the regulator to actually introduce some kind of those lower level regulations to for all the operators to better understand certain questions. So in that sense, I think it does seem that there is a great opportunity for success in Serbia.
It definitely will be interesting to see what the impact of an operator like Flutter, which is pretty highly regulated around the world, is in terms of...
Yeah, and from the news, they've taken over MaxBet, which is one of the biggest players in the market, land-based and online. So I mean, they have a great perspective already, and with Flutter's experience, I would expect them to have a nice go.
Definitely be some things to talk about next year. All right, thank you all very much for listening. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you. All right, so I have some good news. We have a record which is standing for, I think, 6 years in Prague for the person who came back to the hotel. It was like 6:34 or something like that after the party. So this year in Budapest, that record was broken. Somebody went back to their place at 9 o'clock. And we have the proof right there, yeah. So that's a new record. All right, so we will have a short